Coming to you from the dining room table at East Barbary Lane, welcome to a very special episode of Full Circle, the podcast. Today we welcome Amberlyn Boiter, Vice President of the local Spartanburg, South Carolina chapter of PFLAG, and her lovely wife, Gabby, who has referred to herself as an accidental lesbian, and I just love that. Welcome to the Full Circle table.
Hi, Charles. Hi, Martha. Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you so much
for having us.
Oh, we appreciate you so much.
Of course, welcome.
A friend of ours in South Carolina stumbled upon your table. What was the event?
Every year in April, Spartanburg has a community event that they call Spring Fling. It's a typical festival type thing where you pay $20 for a corn dog and just everybody wanders around and part of that carnival festival type environment is an area that they call the community showcase, and so various organizations and vendors and things like that can set up a tent or a booth out there, and so PFLAG and one of our partner organizations, Uplift Outreach Center, had set up a couple of tents there, and then our now mutual friend stopped by and connected us.
Nice. That's
He's good for that.
Yeah.
He really is. Yeah, you should talk to each other. And you know, he's always on the money. It's our friend Stephen Joyner is a publicist. Father of a trans child, and just all around really, really great guy to work with. And so I was so thankful that he did put us in connection.
Definitely.
Before we talk about the work, and I really want to talk about the work, I really want to better understand, you know, life on the ground in South Carolina right now. But I'd love to know more about your transition as a family, and, you know, either or both of you, because certainly you've both transitioned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, to do a no-no like we talked about just before we started, I am going to use transgender as a noun and say that I am a little bit of a baby trans.
Yeah.
I am a COVID baby in the trans community. I came out socially in August of 2021 after going through probably a good solid year of just flux. Honestly, had started a few of the medical steps in transition as well prior to coming out socially. But one thing that I think is kind of important to let people know, especially people who come out later in life, a lot of times we hear these stories of the trans person who said, I always knew all my life I was screaming that I was a girl, or I was screaming that I was a boy at 3 or 4 years old. And for a while, that caused me to kind of question my own experience, because that was, while I can certainly point to many events in my childhood that said, yeah, I was definitely different, because it wasn't to that intensity that we hear so often, it did make me question a lot. Probably my earliest memory was at probably 4 years old. One of my favorite shows at the time was Wheel of Fortune. And I really, really resonated with Vanna White.
Okay.
And my parents thought that it was just, you know, he just really likes Vanna White, really thinks that she's pretty and everything else. And yeah, that was true. But, you know, later on you find out that there's a little more to that. And by 14, having never met a trans person, I knew that that was a path that felt really right to me, but also I was in the Deep South. I was in very very religious upbringings and things like that. And so I kind of put myself on hold until I was 33 and started exploring a lot of different things. And then in May of 2021, I was sitting on our couch after having been married. At that point, we've been married for
8 years.
8 years, or almost 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
I was almost hyperventilating, and I said, I need to explore this more, and I effectively just need to know that I have your permission to explore all the way.
Right.
And to say that was a difficult conversation is really an understatement for us, because we both were raised in very, very conservative religious families.
Mm-hmm.
We were actively involved in a Southern Baptist megachurch at the time. I played bass guitar on stage in this thousands big megachurch not every Sunday, but in rotation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was pretty sure that my marriage was going to be over. And
we
I'll let you.
Just adopted a baby girl.
Mm-hmm.
So you add that into the mix, and my first thought was, this cannot be happening. This cannot be happening. We've just grown our family after trying for many years. And so it took a leap of faith, and just kind of reevaluating our relationship, and kind of basically what we meant to each other. Do I want to stick around and see this through, or do I just want to call it quits and hightail it out of here?
Right.
But then it just kind of resonated that she's my best friend, and I love her, for who she is. And even though there was that physical attraction before transition, I can still find her attractive now. And, it was like, this is the person I fell in love with, so I'm going to stick around.
And that's the meat of it. Yeah. The person, everything about the person is still there. Mm-hmm. They're still the same person you fell in love with. Mm-hmm. Just the packaging changed a little bit.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But,
and the gift inside is the more important part.
Exactly.
I will agree. You're both the children of Baptist ministers. Am I right about that?
Yeah.
So, and the Southern, I have some experience with the American Baptist Church, which is quite different. Mm-hmm. Tends to be affirming. I was raised a Catholic, but I spent several years in Pentecostal churches. So, I know that there are some real similarities where the trans and queer community come into play. I was given an exorcism as a gift by a family member.
Thanks.
Surprise attack. Didn't do anything, of course. And but it took me years. It took me years to sort through that, to sort through, my place in this. So how is your faith today? I mean, how do you, have you had to, do you feel like you've had to abandon faith, reimagine it, find a new community? Is there a community you found? Can we talk about that a little?
Yeah. I think you'll find that this is one of those places where our relationship had to grow a lot. We had to reach a point in our marriage where it almost sounds counterintuitive, but we had to reach a point in our marriage where we said, I love you enough to be willing to let you go, because I care more about you thriving in life than just being mad at you that you've left me.
Right.
And I think once we hit that point, there was this level of honesty that we were able to have with each other that we've never seen before. And so often, like so often we encounter, friends or family members who have rocky marriages, and it's so obvious that they're just not talking, or they're just not being truthful with one another. So in faith, this was very much a case of Gabby, I guess, used it as her footing to be able to accept me, because she felt in her soul that she was at peace with God about continuing to stay with her wife. It's been a lot more difficult process for me. I am in a state of, I guess, deconstruction right now. I am waiting to see what I build back out of those pieces now that I've pulled them all apart. But it's really raw for me right now, and it's very easy for me to be very bitter, because I see 3 decades of me putting a ton into the church, and now the very group of people who always called me a friend and always said that they were there to support me, I realized that a lot of that had conditions. So I am in a very different place of right now, kind of sitting in this, I'm a hopeful agnostic, for lack of a better word, of like, I hope that there's something there, but if it is this complicated group of rules that are not very well defined and can be interpreted 30,000 different ways, I'm not very interested in worshiping that God.
I hear that. I hear that.
Oh, yeah.
But I do want Gabby to speak a little bit from her place as well. But definitely for me, it's still a little difficult, still a little raw right now.
And if I can just, that what you are experiencing is absolutely normal.
Oh, yeah.
There's so much pain between faith communities and the LGBTQ community. And what I believe we come to learn as trans people is that whatever God is, us in transition, us fully realizing our authenticity and having the courage to express it, that is bringing the body of Christ. Whatever those things mean, all of that teaching, we are at our best and most God-like when we're telling the simple truth. And that really is the fight, I guess, if we want to call it a fight, between traditional religious communities and the queer community at large, is the notion that we are real because we are real. We know that. We know that no amount of prayer ever changed an orientation or a gender identity, because that's wiring, right? So I said, if you look at us like a house, you cannot change the wiring here. You can change the plumbing. You can change the plumbing, but you can't change the wiring.
Right.
It's not a thing that can be done. Otherwise, every queer kid ever who was raised in church wouldn't be. And so we have these programs like Exodus International that have come out of the church that have really tortured a lot of people. They really have, and it's hard to reckon. It's really hard to reckon, and it's hard to rebuild those pieces. And there are faith communities. There are that are welcoming, that are affirming, that absolutely say, without question, this is the image of God. You are also the image of God. Because one of the things I do all the time is I don't talk about Father God, I talk about Mother God. I've said, I believe whatever God might be, she's bigger than anything we decide to call her. And that messes with a lot of people. It's meant to.
I'm sure.
It's meant to.
Absolutely.
But if we are each in the image of God, then God is also a woman as much as God might be a man. Like, the human terms don't always fit. So I wish you an open heart and, community that love and affirm you, because it's not an easy journey. It's not an easy journey, but expressing what you know of yourself is important. And no one knows you better than you know yourself. And that's the hubris that kind of comes at us, is someone telling us who has not lived our experience what it is to be us. That really?
Right.
Really?
Right.
Gabby, where are you faith-wise? Where are you?
So I think for me, I'm through this journey relying heavily on my faith. So back in May when Lenny, well, I call her Lenny, came out to me, and, we were sitting on the couch and we were having this really intense conversation. I just remember praying in my mind, God, I need your help. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I don't know if I can do this. And we went to bed and we were like, we're just going to sleep on it. We're going to, kind of get our bearings, because it was so huge of news. How do you just right then and there make a decision of what you're going to do that's going to affect your whole life? And so the next morning I got up and I had this complete peace that everything was going to be okay. That God brought Lenny and I together for a reason. And I still firmly believe that. Just because how we even met, that whole story was just kind of a miracle in and of itself.
We met on a Christian dating website.
Okay.
But
I'm thinking about writing them a success story.
I think you should.
I think you should.
Yeah.
But it just felt like this is where I'm supposed to be. This is my person. And I even knew before, she was my person, but you're bucking all of tradition that you were taught. And so, in my mind, I guess I just couldn't even see that. She is still my person. She is still, who I'm supposed to be with. And so, I just feel like God completely helped me see that. So yeah, it's been tough, but I feel like God has seen me through a lot of things. We've lost family and friends through this, and it's just I don't know, I feel like my faith has grown and has been my rock, and I've just been able to be well, it is what it is. I've got my person, I'm okay, kind of thing. So
there it is.
I think that's where we are.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because kind of the other side of it, of transition, when you were a couple before, and we were a couple before, we've been together now almost 10 years. And we just got engaged in December.
Oh, congratulations.
Because I finally said it was okay. I said, you can ask me now. I was married twice. I have 2 grown children. I was married twice. I said, I'm not good at marriage. She said, maybe stop marrying women.
Yeah, that was my thing. Apparently you weren't good at being married to women.
I said, okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, you have different conversations, kind of once everything is out there, and the bond that forms as a result of having that most difficult conversation, right? So we carry this thing that we come to know about ourselves, and whether you're 14 or 24 when you kind of learn to put words around it, or 54, that does happen. There's not a right way to be trans, and that's one of the most important things anyone can hear or absorb. There's not a right way to do it. There is not a rule book. There is not a hierarchy, even though there are some who will say there is, because that denies the fullness of trans folks who don't have access to transition, or don't have access to a surgery, or just frankly don't want one. And they are no less trans. They are no less authentic in their, the way that they understand their gender. And, the more time that goes on, the more we do have an expansive vocabulary around gender to say that there are plenty of non-binary folks that aren't quite, never did fit. And it's a big encompassing discussion. But when we come to find ourselves, and we've had the hardest part of the conversation. So this thing that we thought we always had to hide because they told us we didn't really exist in the first place. You're not real. You don't honor God. This is just sin talking, like all of it. I've heard it. And when you put that aside and say, and yet this is the truth of me, and you share that with a person, and you have a partner who sees you and still takes your hand, the rest of it kind of doesn't matter. I say have some or don't. Like
it needs to be a shirt.
If you've got a problem with me, or this doesn't make sense to you, or you feel somehow my transition is an affront to you, I want you to live and be well.
Yeah.
But there's not much for us to talk about, because the one thing I won't do is apologize to anyone, and I believe Gabby would agree. You lived your life with integrity even before that conversation. That's why Gabby loves you. The life you lived was being the best person you possibly could, but you carried this thing inside that said, but this doesn't fit. It just doesn't fit.
Yeah, so absolutely.
And you both glow. So
there have been so many times that we'll just lay down in bed at night, and it's just, I'll look over at her and start crying, because it's the way I describe.
No, sorry.
Yeah. That's a whole different thing. Yeah. But for me, I think my transition was a lot less dysphoria, and it was the discovery of euphoria. And yes. it was, I hit a point in my life where I realized, the happiness scale goes up to 10. I've been sitting here at a maximum of 6 for 30 years.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that this was possible. And you spend a lot of this. I end up spending a lot of time just being kind of amazed that I recognize the person in the mirror.
Yeah.
It's so weird. It's so weird to describe that to people, but like before, it felt like I was driving some avatar around in a game. And
there's something to that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, and the result of that is you do have a more, I guess, authentic person.
Mm-hmm.
It's easier for us to like each other.
That's good. That's important. That is important.
And those initial feelings are definitely real. I went through a period, albeit a brief period, where I said to Martha, like, when she asked, what are my thoughts when she came out to me? And at first I said, well, this isn't what I signed up for. I thought that I was going to be in a relationship with another man. Not that being in a relationship with a woman is not something I haven't done happily. It's just, that's not what I thought I was doing. But in the long run,
surprise,
right? In the long run, it doesn't make a difference, because this is the person that I'm in love with. This is the person that I value and cherish. And aside from superficial things, there's no difference. And I express gratitude every night before I go to sleep that she is in my life. Like literally every night.
Yeah.
I do that
familiar, right?
It does.
Has parenting changed, gotten better, gotten different?
All of the above, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want to talk a little bit?
I think we've redefined the roles that we thought that we had to carry. So like as before, she was the breadwinner. She still is, but it was maybe a little bit more hands off on the
protector, provider, nurturer, comforter.
Sure.
And we very much now have kind of, other than the fact that we're still a single income family, we've kind of thrown most of that out the window.
We've learned to co-parent a lot better. I still take care of our daughter about 3/4 of the time because obviously she has a full-time job. But like, if I need a mom's night out because I'm like, she's been a holy terror today or something like that, then Lenny comes and she's like, you know what? I got you. Like, go ahead. And whereas before it would have been like, well, this is your job. Like your job is to take care of our child. And so it's more of a team effort now.
Yeah, I think one thing that's been difficult, I think, is trying to find. When we first met, Gabby had ideas of a huge family, lots of bio kids, right? And it just was not possible for us. It was not possible for us to have biological children. So she waited for 8 years to be a mom. Well, in a marriage, she waited for 8 years in a marriage to be a mom. She'd waited all of her life for it. Now there's another female parent. And so there was a period where she felt like I was maybe, I guess, encroaching on something that she had waited so long to be.
That was a little rough. That took some adjusting on my part, and I had to let go of like there can only be one mom in this family, like because that's what you grew up with, like that's what you were told was right. And so it took a little bit of adjusting on my part, but now I'm like, hey, you want to go to your other mom? Like here.
Yeah. So we have no problem with people calling us moms. When I give testimonies in our state capitol, I call myself a mother. I think the only thing that you're like holding firmly onto is Mother's Day. So what we decided to do was she still has Mother's Day. We're using the term mati for me. It's a Croatian word for mother. Gabby and her family actually were missionaries in Croatia for a while. Wow. So we're using mati for me. So we have like Mother's Day. We're going to create a Mati's Day that we're going to celebrate ourselves. And then we're going to have this Don't Need No Father's Day that we're going to use. So in our minds, we're going to use Father's Day as a celebration of our daughter instead.
I love it.
Yeah, that's amazing. Now, how old is she?
She is 15 months. So she's tiny.
Okay.
Do you want to?
Yeah.
Yeah. I will do the,
She's the proud mama. She's all the time showing pictures.
Yeah. Like, yeah.
And this is a child being raised in love.
Aww. Whoops. Hold on.
Beautiful.
I'll focus that.
I love that picture.
Her little.
She's glowing too.
Yeah, her little yogurt milk mustache.
I love it. I love it. I am so happy for your family.
Thank you.
And I was not raised with gender norms. Like my mother always worked full time. She was the only mom on the street who did. My father was a union carpenter, so a lot of the times he was out of work especially in the dead of winter. My father had taken care of his mother when she was sick. So my dad baked and he sewed and he cooked and he cleaned. Like, he did all of those non-traditional things. But then as I got a little bit older, I saw my sister was in the church, very much in the church, and those gender roles and what men are supposed to be and what women are supposed to be. And I had to study it. It was a study. And I, for a long time, I went with the idea that the chaos that was my childhood, because there was a lot of chaos that had nothing to do with gender roles, but that was why.
Mm-hmm.
And so a man is supposed to be these things and the head of the house and all of that. And it took a long time to get past it, especially in my first marriage. It was an expectation we both sort of had, and neither one of us lived up to it well.
Right.
Because it just didn't fit us.
Right.
So kind of when you blow all that up and you say, let's take a fresh look at love and having a home, it's really freeing.
Mm-hmm.
It's really freeing because we put so much pressure on men. Like, everybody likes to talk about how we socialize boys, and we don't socialize anyone well.
Right.
I mean, we're doing a better job of it as time goes on, but when we do that, when we impose gender and all the rules, we make life hard for everyone. Not women and men. We it's so limiting. So It's so refreshing to see, that you can break it open and say, wait a minute, this is okay. Not what I expected.
Right.
But I think it's better.
I think that was another, I think, a surprising thing. I know I'm jumping back a little bit into like the relationship dynamic, but there are roles in relationship dynamics that people think about, and once we got over that the chaos of coming out to her and coming out to family, coworkers, friends, all of that stuff, once we got through the rocky part of that, we had a therapy session with our therapist one day, and we said, Teresa, I think we've just realized that we don't know how to lesbian.
Okay.
We were like, who
I know
opens
a lot
the door?
Of lesbians that don't know how to lesbian. A lot of them.
Right. But it was very much like we hit this moment of going, like, Gabby was terrified. She's like, I don't want people to think that I'm the butch. I'm like, well, you don't have to have a butch. Like, you can have, you can have two femmy girls, and then she's like, but who's going to open the door for who? And I'm like, we can take turns. It's fine. Like,
first.
Right. So that was I think it was a really fun period of discovery for us.
It was. I grew up with the mindset of I wanted to be like the 1950s housewife kind of thing. Like, I wanted, the man opening the door and like all this stuff. And that's what Lenny did before transitioning. Like, she opened my doors. She, was just that chivalrous man that like every woman wants kind of thing. And so like I was like, I don't know what to do. Like, I don't know how to feel about this. Like, yeah, and now I'm just like, oh, that was so stupid.
we because sometimes you like to be dated.
Yeah.
Sometimes you like to date.
And we take turns. Like, Lenny will be like, I feel like I need to be dated. I need someone to open my car doors. I need someone to pay for the check. like I need, and I'm like, okay, I got you. And then like the next time it's like, well, I really need to be dated now, and so it's that taking turns kind of thing.
Yeah.
So.
And that can be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It absolutely can be.
Yeah. Yeah. That's wonderful. We're going to take a short break and pay a bill. And when we come back, I really want to talk about the work you're involved in, because I'm just deeply inspired that you've jumped right into working with the community. So we'll be right back.
All right.
And we're back.
We're back.
So I want to talk about your work in South Carolina. You had mentioned South Carolina United for Justice and Equality. PFLAG, which you're the vice president of a chapter, and you've also mentioned Uplift
Outreach Center.
Uplift Outreach Center, which is, I think, we have the Attic Youth Center. Which is
it's an LGBTQ safe space for youth. We work with youth between ages of 11 to 22.
Nice.
We break them out into tweens, teens, and young adults. So like 11 to 15, 16 to 18, or 11 to 14, 15 to 18, and 19 to 22.
Okay.
And we try to make it as youth-led of an organization as possible, kind of give them the opportunity to control their own destiny. All of our meetings are drop-in, and it's really cool to see sometimes, a youth come in and they have their parent in tow, and their parent's kind of like, I don't understand any of this. I just want them to be happy, and kind of, some of them are kind of like, here, you deal with it, and then others are honestly, they're terrified for their child, but they love them, and it shows, and it is. I make a point every time I have one of those encounters. I thank them. I say, thank you for letting your child be one of the lucky ones.
Nice.
I love that. And when parents affirm their children, we know it makes all the difference. And the younger they affirm them, we know it makes all the difference. We know the numbers, the suicide numbers and the attempts go way down. They go way down when these kids are just told that they're loved and that, they're seen.
Right.
How often does the group meet?
They meet twice a week. They meet on Tuesdays. That is commonly used as a study help time. Okay. And they also meet on Saturdays. Funnily enough, we meet out of a space that is rented to us by a Baptist church. But they are an affirming Baptist church.
Love that.
Always.
So yeah, it's a really neat space, and we pretty frequently have we have a mental health counselor who comes in periodically, does some various trainings, exercises, teaches coping strategies, things like that. We work with them on social justice projects. We try to get them involved in building their own campaigns for self-advocacy and things like that. And really just giving them the resources that that schools are not giving them right now.
Right.
Safe sex for queer teens. I mean, it's not taught in schools here.
No, it is not.
And it's super important.
It is super important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It one of the things I have always said about the pro-life, pro-choice debate is, if what we really care about is having as few abortions as possible, we actually know how to do that. Mm-hmm. We know how to impact that. Mm-hmm. But that means we tell kids the truth. We give them honest sex education young enough to intervene. We give them access to birth control, and we teach them to be responsible. Abstinence only has never worked, but it does lead to more abortion. I mean, that's right. That should be common sense, but it's yet another wedge issue, and it continues to be a profitable one.
And anti-abortion call themselves pro-life, but up until you want to put them on the hook for the bill of that life, they are no longer pro-life. And Martha, it is so amazing to encounter just how capable these children are of being self-aware. Their self-awareness is unreal. and we do not equip them to really express themselves. We try to keep them in this little box. And there's a 12 or 13-year-old trans boy at Uplift who knows all of the flags, will be sitting at a table with his peers, and he'll say, "What is your gender identity and sexual orientation?" And then another one of his peers will say, "Well, I'm not real sure what all of that means." He's like, "Oh, well, I'm a trans boy and I'm gay because I like boys and this and this and this," and gives a perfect explanation of what sexual orientation and gender identity is. It has nothing to do with genitals. There's no explicit conversation happening or anything like that. He's saying, "I am a boy and I like boys."
Right.
And his level of self-awareness is just, I think we've been conditioned to think that like those types of conversations apparently are just incapable of being processed until we're 18. And I don't understand where that came from.
Well, yeah. What happens every single time is children tell us who they are.
Mm-hmm.
If we're listening, and if we allow them the space to do that, they will, no matter what. How we listen, really is determined by the parents.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't have the argument that we're all sinners
mm-hmm.
and that we don't know ourselves and then affirm these kids. You kind of can't do both.
Right. Yeah.
And that's why, when you reach parents, when parents say, because no matter your political persuasion, parents love their kids. Parents do the best for their kids. Now, their kid could challenge absolutely everything about them. I mean, I'm gay or I'm trans. I'm not a boy, I'm a girl. Like these kids come to their parents and say these things. That's how this happens. We're not generating it. We can't instill it. That's not how any of this works.
Mm-hmm.
And there are an awful lot of parents that say, okay, this makes no sense to me, but I have to listen and I have to learn more.
Yeah.
And that's where, the kids are the lucky ones.
Mm-hmm.
They're the lucky ones. But, trying to do it in an atmosphere where no matter how many times that's proven to be just factual, it doesn't fit a narrative. It does, and it's a political narrative. It is also a religious narrative, but it's both. And I'm not sure which aspect is stronger at this point, because one feeds the other, and it's all about money.
Really, yeah, and it's very intertwined. There's so much nuance, so much to sit here and say the problem is there's a zillion problems and they're all related to each other, and we just have to try our best to get along and untangle everything together.
Yeah. Right. So there have been 10 or 12 pieces of legislation in South Carolina. Mm-hmm. You have testified. You have lobbied. Can you tell me about the work that you've done and how that's gone?
Sure. So, being the vice president of PFLAG, which I think any queer person knows, PFLAG's background is the largest and oldest national support network for parents, families, and friends of lesbians and gays and transgender, anyone in the LGBTQ community. Right. That put me in connection with a coalition of people that go by SC United for Justice and Equality. And they, one of their biggest members is Campaign for Southern Equality, which is based out of North Carolina, and is actually one of the founders of it is a lesbian woman who is a Unitarian minister. And so she is she is working really hard to try to impact equality here in the South entirely, not just South Carolina. But with SC United, we in South Carolina have been up against several different pieces of legislation. The first one that I really got involved with was there were 5 different bills that were introduced in our House of Representatives. They all had censorship elements to them for education. They were talking about, of course, the boogeyman of critical race theory. And there were also, even though it didn't call out critical race theory, it said critical race theory and then gave a bunch of definitions that are not critical race theory.
Which is usually what happens.
Yep.
Right. Mm-hmm. We had that. We had also in those bills, there was language banning particular educational materials. And there was South Carolina's version of a Don't Say Gay piece of legislation, all built into these 5 bills. And the way the way that they were presented was the Education and Public Works Committee said, we have these 5 bills. And so we need to take these 5 bills and turn them into one piece of legislation that we can get passed. So effectively, they were shotgunning to get some type of legislation through. The testimony that I gave in particular on that piece of legislation, because the anti-LGBTQ elements of it were very geared toward not having age inappropriate or sexually explicit material in the classroom. And some of the first words out of my mouth in that testimony were, I am the mother of a small child who's going to be in school very shortly. When she gets to school, she has 2 moms. One of those moms is a trans woman. Those are facts of her life. It's not sexually explicit material. It is not age inappropriate material. That is her family structure.
Right.
And for you to prohibit her from talking about that in her classroom will go to create the very discomfort that is all throughout this bill that you're saying that you don't want white straight kids to feel.
That part.
Yeah, it is that part. Yeah.
Yeah. And thankfully, there was a child bill that came out of those 5 bills. Thankfully, it did not have the Don't Say Gay language in it. Unfortunately, there are still some concerns from the racial perspective in there. And there is also a provision that says that schools cannot require teachers to undergo sensitivity training for gender identity and things like that. So they're not saying that you can't say those things, but they are saying that the schools cannot require the teachers to learn how to be nice to their queer students.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was just one piece of legislation.
Has that passed?
That has passed the House. It's being debated in the Senate now. I need to check. I have no idea if anything's happened today. They meet Tuesday through Thursday during the week, so it's possible that it's gone forward. But anyway, so no, that one in particular has not passed yet.
Okay.
We also had another piece of legislation on banning trans girls from sports because, of course, just following the same set of rhetoric. Mm-hmm. That one did pass our House. It is in the Senate. It is probably expected to pass, if I'm perfectly honest. We also had legislation and I did testify on the trans sports bill as well. We lobbied on the trans sports bill. And we got a lot of lip service from politicians that said that they stood with us, but I feel like in some cases we end up being bargained so that they can pause another bill that's further down the road. They delay this one just long enough to make sure that the one that they actually care about falls off the docket, and then let it pass. But that's a whole different thing. So we have the transports bill. We've got medical
vouchers.
Vouchers, yeah. So school vouchers, where they're talking about allowing public funds to be used to allow parents to take their children to private schools, which is public funds being used to take children to discriminatory schools.
Oh yeah.
And it's like if you're gonna set aside that amount of funding, I would prefer that they use that funding to pay the teachers we have more, or bring up security, because we had a school shooting in South Carolina in late March. And we had a medical discrimination bill that allows doctors to deny care based on personal beliefs. There is a bill that's been introduced blocking health care for trans kids. So yeah, I mean, basically anything that we're hearing out of the playbook, out of states like Texas and Alabama, they're being introduced here. Weirdly, South Carolina has a pretty strong legislative opposition. So we're not succeeding in everything, but we are succeeding in more things than we're seeing some states do.
Well, and Texas actually had succeeded up until the point where Governor Abbott tried his nonsense. The problem was, the ACLU was on the ground, and everything was being challenged at every step, the Transgender Law Project, etc. And they weren't having legislative success. So he's like, well, I'm just going to make shit up and sign it into law, or sign it into executive order, or whatever that was supposed to be. And so far, the courts are holding, that this is not okay.
Right.
Calling, these parents child abusers. And that's what is so funny to me, is when you read the language of some of this that says this is about parental choice. What about the parental choice of the parents of trans children?
That's exactly right.
I wonder, is there a difference in the lobbying sessions? So is there, testifying is very formal.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of bluster. There's a lot from both sides of the aisle. There's a lot of bluster. Mm-hmm. Is it different when you're in a lobbying session? Is it different when the cameras are off and you're having an unofficial conversation? Is it any better?
There are two types of conversations that I've had with legislators that fall outside of the formal. And one is in a lobby session, which if you've never gone to lobby, it is utter chaos. It is fascinating and terrifying and miserable and wonderful all at the same time. And so you're standing there and you're saying, hey, I want to see Representative so-and-so, or I want to see Senator so-and-so. And this person comes out and you talk to them for 3 minutes, and then a bell starts ringing and they're like, oh, I've got to go vote, I'll be back. Or oh, I've got to go vote, I'll see you later. In those short conversations in the lobby, I have felt like I have at least been heard. They do frankly express their concerns. They do not give you leading questions. They say, I am concerned based on this, or I think this because of this, or I can't vote this way because of that. So I do feel like you get a little more frank of an answer when you go to a lobby session. And then the other type of conversation I have had is randomly running into the legislator in the hallway. Those are far more valuable.
I would imagine.
Those are far more valuable because
unscripted.
It's very unscripted. They know there's not a giant audience. I mean, even in the lobby, there's hundreds of people there. if you're in a hallway, it's you and them, maybe 2 other people. And so I ran into one of the Republican representatives. For some reason, she keeps an open dialogue with me. I wouldn't say that it has had a giant impact, but we did have that LGBT language removed from those censorship bills. So when she ran into me in the hallway, she gave me a hug, and like half of the people that I was with from SC United, they were looking at me like, "Oh shit, we have a mole."
Right.
But afterwards, I told them I'm not going to burn a bridge with this person if I have their ear.
Right.
And so we did have a pretty meaningful conversation. And she told me, I gave her credit where credit was due. And I said, I can tell that there's been work done on this bill. I'm not happy with it, but I can tell there's been work done. And I can tell that you have been really beat up over it. And she said, yeah, I have. And she said, and to be honest with you, I think some of the other things that you're concerned about are going to get chopped up as it makes its way through the rest of the system. It's encouraging, but I also don't like that when we're talking about things like people's livelihoods, that we have to have faith in people.
I wonder, do you think when we get past the midterms, will the rhetoric die down?
I think one of 2 things will happen. And I love that you asked that question. I think we're going to see the rhetoric get hotter and hotter and hotter until the midterms. And then they're going to know whether or not it works. And so I think what happens between 22 and 24 for our community really lies on and rests on the public's response to the rhetoric here in the midterms.
And that's really the way politicians are going to understand the response. I mean, if we have low turnout in the midterms, or we have, one of the things I keep saying is one of the ways we respond to all of this nonsense that keeps coming at us in different states, and it's this giant game of whack-a-mole, is to vote. Is to tell everyone who loves you to vote, is to tell everyone in your communities to make sure they're registered and make sure they vote and make sure they understand who's pushing what and who's doing what. Because, like we're seeing in Florida, as, the rhetoric has increased, now you've got the governor willing to burn down the state to make a point.
Right.
And punish Disney for calling him an asshat, but he keeps doubling down.
Right.
So it's scary. It's scary that the escalation is frightening, and it's going to be, I think, for a little bit. I do think you're right, the midterm, but if they win, they're going to be emboldened. If they gain more power, they're going to be emboldened, particularly at the federal level. I think it's just going to fuel more of the state legislature stuff. And right now, most of it is holding in the courts that this is unconstitutional, that this is not okay. So just so we know, in South Carolina, I think you had told me, we know that there are probably about 35,000 trans citizens in total.
As best as we know, yeah.
As best as we know, of course. We're only aware of 5 that are school age. Am I right?
We're only aware of 5 who have applied to play in sports.
Okay.
So there are far more than 5 trans kids across the state
I didn't know
that are school age. Yeah.
Okay. But identified as, or who have actually tried to play sports.
Right.
And then there was also a number, I wrote down the number 3. So are there 3 currently playing, or?
There are 3 in the almost decade of so for almost a decade, our state has had policies in place for K through 12 sports. There was a panel of people formed by the South Carolina High School League. It includes psychologists, coaches, doctors, or medical professionals, I should say, members of the community at large, things like that. And this panel has a set of policies, and they review on a case-by-case basis, because we were talking about how trans experience is different for everyone. So they were reviewing on a case-by-case basis each of these applicants who wanted to play in the sport that they identified with as their gender. In the near decade that we have had this program, there have been 5 applicants, and 3 of them have been allowed to play. So not this year, but in almost a decade, there have been 3.
Wow. Well, yeah. And there are states where there are no known examples of trans kids trying to play, and they're still pushing this legislation. Mm-hmm. In Kentucky, we just saw the story. And these are the stories I really hope backfire. There's one trans girl who wanted to play field hockey. There was no team. She formed the team. Right. She got all the other girls involved. So we can absolutely say this kid is in favor of girls' sports. Yeah. And created a team where there was none, and she will be the one student not allowed to play next year. And she pulled it all together. I mean, our kids are magic, and they do magic things when they're just allowed to be themselves. And yet, so all of these adults in the legislature are really aiming all of this and all of this money and attention at one child.
Right. One child. Exactly.
It's horrifying. And I hope, sometimes I'm Pollyanna, but it is my hope that parents and grandparents look on at this stuff, even if they don't have a trans person or a queer person in their families or in their lives, and say, but if I did, this is a bridge too far. All of this is too much. Mm-hmm. It should be my decision. These things should be in some, I don't even think we need a panel. I don't think we need a case-by-case thing. And if we allow healthcare, by and large, puberty blockers knock out the entire argument. And of course, no one is arguing about trans boys. Exactly. Because their arguments don't apply.
Exactly.
And, if you just make all kids sports unisex, which a lot of schools have done, because they're smaller schools or because of lack of participation, there's girls kicking boys' asses through soccer and softball and
you can do rugby. And if you're worried about abilities, you can do qualifications for different classes of team.
Sure,
and
you could do
and
weight
things
classes.
Like that. Yeah,
weight, size. Do something that makes a little bit of sense.
Well, I always go back to the example of a couple years ago in North Carolina. I forget if it was UNC or Duke. There was a cis woman who beat the men's wrestling team. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, doesn't that kill the entire argument right there?
So one of my good friends who testified against the trans sports bill is intersex. Gabby has PCOS, which in itself does, all kinds of androgenic things to a cis female body. And so there are so many, average biological variations from person to person. To just strictly break it down into the categories of male and female sports really doesn't make sense, in my opinion.
I don't think it ever did. And, if they want to have the conversation about equity in women's sports, let's have it. Let's go to Texas A&M and say, how much are the men getting versus how much are the women getting? Let's make it equal.
And these were the same arguments that were brought.
But then it's like, slow down.
Yeah. We didn't mean that.
Yeah.
We never meant that.
Yeah, exactly.
And the arguments are sound ones. I guess it's a question of, do you feel like they're listening?
I think they're concerned with votes right now. I hope that means that some of them are going to introduce bills that I hope none of them introduce any crappy bills, I should say. But I hope that means that if they need it for vote, they're going to count on the fact that their average citizen is politically dumb. They don't care about the legislative process. And so, depending on when they file a bill, we can know with reasonable confidence whether or not it will die. And so, what I hope is that if you really feel like you really need to get hateful people on board so that you can get voted in again, if you're not going to check yourself and wonder why that's your voting base, then at least file the bill in a way that you can beat your chest and say you did all the things, and then let it die.
Right.
But instead, we are seeing a lot of them get crammed down our throats.
I don't think there's any more important work, though, than making them look us in the eye.
Mm-hmm.
Than going and calmly making the arguments, and really as degrading as it is that we have to even do this. Like, let's just, that absolutely true. We should not have to, but if not us, who? And if not now, when? Because now is when the push is being made. Right. So, as exhausting as it is, it couldn't be more important to make them sit and see us.
I agree. I think we've talked a little bit already about how a lot of times I don't think we're seen as human.
Right.
I make a point in all of my testimonies to say, I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I live in a suburban home, I've got a 2-car garage, all of the things that make me just as boring as you are. And again, just putting ourselves in front of them, like you said, as degrading as it can be, I think it does the most good because I think their expectation is that from the moment we wake up to the moment we pass out in the middle of an orgy pile or whatever it is that they think that we're doing, that we're just doing drugs and
corrupting today's
youth. And I think, I sometimes wonder, do they think that we're out trying to convert people to gayness in some way just because that's the only life that they've known, is trying to convert people to their way of thinking?
Ding, ding.
I think that's part of it.
And you forgot sacrificing the chickens.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's part of it. The other thing we come to know is ministers and politicians and others who are the loudest are often just closeted, self-loathing community members because they also have a Grindr profile.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. So they fight against us and then try to hit us up for sex later. That's just always been the case. And it's the hypocrisy. It's in the air. I'm like, welcome to my gay agenda. I'm going to make him dinner. I'm going I'm going to have to empty the litter box later. The dog's going to need a walk.
Well, and was it you, Charles, that was telling me you had friends over and you found out after the fact that they'd been fretting about?
I had family members who didn't know what to expect and actually called me the next day and said, wow, that was a really pleasant surprise and we had a good time.
We're delightful people.
We are. And I said, thank you. We have really excellent friends.
Yeah.
They are great people. And, I don't know what they expected.
What are they going to do with the hot dogs?
We had queer people, we had trans people, we had everybody. But I have a neighbor who's been here for 35 years. She is a lesbian. And I was just telling her the story. I said, apparently things went well and they were surprised. And she said, what do they think we do at a barbecue?
Yeah.
What did they think was going to happen? I'm like,
right.
I don't know.
Right.
We had badminton, we had croquet, we had grilled food.
The wildest thing was our friend Franny brought her pink lemonade concoction. That was the wildest thing that happened.
Right.
Well, yeah, because there's a lot of vodka in her pink lemonade, but that was an icebreaker.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was just they don't have a lot of interaction, with our community, and
they're told they shouldn't.
Right. And this is too worldly, this is too whatever, our politics are too far left, and then to just come to a barbecue and say, wow, that was just a really fun, relaxed, peaceful, loving barbecue. And people were smiling and friendly and nice, and everybody had a good time, and nobody sacrificed the children, and there were many running around. Wow. Yeah. Not what we expected at all. And it's like, I didn't ask that question, but what did you expect?
Right.
What did you expect? And I think we're all trying to figure out how to say, when you say you don't want to introduce, you want conversations to be age appropriate, and you don't want to sexualize things. We're not. We're talking about our families the same way you're talking about yours.
Right.
You want to normalize, you want a heteronormative conversation, because they seem to think we have magical powers. Like all we have to do is suggest that there are queer people in the world, and their children are going to start to fart glitter. And that's just it. Little Johnny is going to go hug little Brucey, and it's the end of it. And it's like, it doesn't work that way at all. Because if it worked that way, all of our heteronormative families would have had heteronormative children. They didn't.
Right.
I'm like, every time someone suggests we should all go on an island somewhere, I'm like, all right, try that. But y'all better stop having babies.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I've said, if outside influences were that popular, then growing up watching soap operas and movies on television, I would be straight and white.
Yeah. Yeah. You would change color.
Right.
It doesn't work that way.
Love it. Love it. Absolutely love it.
And that's, even as I talk about religion, and I call myself an agnostic, because I've said I don't know enough to call myself an atheist. So agnostic probably fits well. But if there is a God, I think we find it in our spaces and our conversations and the love that we have toward one another. And, I've been a member of the overall queer community for a good long time. We have a lot of friends throughout the community, and it's a love and a family that a lot of families don't have.
Right.
And so, I think these conversations are important. Do you have any final thoughts? What can the rest of us do? So, some states are absolutely being hit harder than others. I mean, we are sitting in New Jersey where our law says LGBTQ history has to be taught K through 12, right along with other history. That's what our law says. Right. There's people who don't like it, but that's actually codified in this state. But that's a lot different than what you're facing. What can we do? What can the rest of us know or do?
I think, honestly, being visible. You can testify against legislation till you're blue in the face. And honestly, even if you're going into a situation, let's say you were a queer person living in the South, and you know that there's a harmful piece of legislation coming up. Ask Gabby. I mean, how terrified was I the first time that I went down to testify?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. But I did it because I recognized the importance of them seeing the person, seeing the human that was there. And it might not go in your favor. In my case, as I approached the podium 2 of the legislators were cutting up and laughing at me as I came to the podium.
Wow.
They're 5-year-olds. I mean, effectively, they're all 5-year-olds. But despite that, I made them see me. Good. And so I think there are a lot of legislators out there who think that queer people don't live in their community, and they're wrong. Mm-hmm. They're very wrong. And I think COVID has contributed to us being a lot more invisible. So it's almost like a lot of us have to come out of the closet again, because we've been out of public view for quite a while, for a couple of years now. So I think if you're in a place where it's safe or safe enough and you're willing to give it a try again, be as gay as you possibly can in public.
Yeah.
Done.
Done. The organizations that we talked about, are any of them set up to receive donations?
Absolutely, they are.
Okay, so tell me which ones.
All right. So, SC United for Justice and Equality. I have a link tree with all of these links I can share with you.
Do that.
And we'll put them in our link tree, as well as the details of this episode.
We'll share them in the episode so that if anyone wants to help. And the youth center, is there a way to contribute there directly?
Absolutely. So you can contribute directly to Uplift Outreach Center. You can contribute directly to PFLAG Spartanburg, or you could contribute to PFLAG overall. SC United for Justice and Equality, Campaign for Southern Equality. There are zillions of organizations out there. So of course I'm sitting here saying, please contribute to the places that I'm involved with. But I mean, you do what's going to help you where you are. And if there's an organization that is fighting for you, of course, contribute to that organization. But if you want to send some our way, that would be lovely.
Definitely. Because the ACLU and Lambda Legal and the Trevor Project, their links just live in our link tree.
They live there,
right.
Yeah. But you're a beautiful, beautiful family with a lovely and compelling story. I can't thank you enough, Amberlyn and Gabby Boiter, for joining us. And if you inspire folks to send a few dollars to those organizations that are doing wonderful work in South Carolina, that's awesome too, because we want to make sure we're sharing the love with you all, because you're doing God's work.
Yeah, exactly.
And I know she loves you, so there you go.
It sounds great, and thank you both so much for having us.
Yes, thank you.
We are just a couple of simple lesbians out in South Carolina.
Hey, and if you want to come back and update us at any point, we would love to have you again.
Yeah,
and we'd love to talk to you some more. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.